Relax and listen to the voice. The Water of Life. There was once a king who had an illness, and no one believed that he would come out of it with his life. He had 3 sons who were much distressed about it, and went down into the palace garden and wept. There they met an old man who inquired as to the cause of their grief. They told him that their father was so ill that he would most certainly die, for nothing seemed to cure him. Then the old man said,
"I know of one more remedy, and that is the water of life. If he drinks of it, he will become well again, but it is very hard to find."
The eldest said, "Well, I will manage to find it," and went to the sick king and begged to be allowed to go forth in search of the water of life, for that alone could save him.
"No," said the king, "the danger of it is too great. I would rather die."
But he begged so long that the king consented. The prince thought in his heart, "If I bring the water, then I shall be best beloved of my father, and shall inherit the kingdom." So he set out, and when he had ridden forth a little distance, a dwarf stood there in the road, who called to him and said,
"Whither away so fast, silly shrimp?"
"Silly shrimp," said the prince very haughtily, "it has nothing to do with you," and he rode on. But the little dwarf had grown angry, and had wished an evil wish. Soon after this, the prince entered a ravine, and the further he rode, the closer to the mountains drew together. And at last the road became so narrow that he could not advance a step further. It was impossible either to turn his horse around or to dismount from the saddle, and he was shut in there as if he was in prison. The sick king waited for him, but he came not. Then the second son said, "Father, let me go forth to seek the water." And he thought to himself, "If my brother is dead, then the kingdom will fall to me." At first the king would not allow him to go either, but at last he yielded. So the prince set on the same road that his brother had taken, and he too met the dwarf, who stopped him to ask whither he was going in such haste. "Little shrimp," said the prince, "that has nothing to do with you." And he rode on without giving him another look. But the dwarf bewitched him, and he, like the other, rode into a ravine, and could neither go forwards nor backwards. So fair haughty people. As the second son also remained away, the youngest begged to be allowed to go forth to fetch the water, and at last the king was obliged to let him go. When he met the dwarf, and the latter asked him whither he was going in such haste, he stopped, gave him an explanation, and said, "I am seeking the water of life, for my father is sick unto death."
"Do you know, then, where that is to be found?"
"No," said the prince.
"As you have borne yourself as is seemly, and not haughtily like your false brothers, I will give you the information and tell you how you may obtain the water of life. It springs from a fountain in the courtyard of an enchanted castle, but you will not be able to make your way to it if I do not give you an iron wand and 2 small loaves of bread. Strike thrice with the wand on the iron door of the castle, and it will spring open. Inside lie 2 lions with gaping jaws, but if you throw a loaf to each of them, they will be quieted. Then hasten to fetch some of the water of life before the clock strikes 12, else the door will shut again, and you will be imprisoned."
The prince thanked him, took the wand and the bread, and set out on his way. When he arrived, everything was as the dwarf said. The door sprang open at the 3rd stroke of the wand, and when he had appeased the lions with the bread, he entered the castle, and came to a large and splendid hall, wherein sat some enchanted princes, whose rings he drew off their fingers. A sword and a loaf of bread were lying there, which he carried away. After this, he entered the chamber, in which was a beautiful maiden, who rejoiced when she saw him, kissed him, and told him that he had set her free, and should have the whole of her kingdom, and that if he would return in a year, their wedding should be celebrated. Likewise, she told him where the spring of the water of life was, and that he was to hasten and draw some of it before the clock struck 12. And then he went onwards, and at last entered a room where there was a beautiful, newly made bed, and as he was very weary, he felt inclined to rest a little, so he lay down and fell asleep. When he awoke, it was striking 11:45. He sprang up in a fright, ran to the spring, drew some water in a cup which stood near, and hastened away. But just as he was passing through the iron door, the clock struck 12, and the door fell to with such violence that it carried away a piece of his heel. He, however, rejoicing at having obtained that water of life, went homewards and again passed the dwarf. When the latter saw the sword and the loaf, he said,
"With these you have won great wealth. With the sword you can slay whole armies, and the bread will never come to an end."
But the prince would not go home to his father without his brothers, and said,
"Dear dwarf, can you tell me where my 2 brothers are? They went out before I did in search of the water of life, but they have not returned." "They are imprisoned between 2 mountains," said the dwarf. "I have condemned them to stay there because they were so haughty."
Then the prince begged until the dwarf released them, but he warned him and said,
"Beware of them, for they have bad hearts."
When his brothers came, he rejoiced and told them how things had gone with him, that he had found the water of life and had brought a cupful away with him, and had rescued a beautiful princess who was willing to wait a year for him, and then their wedding was to be celebrated, and he would obtain a great kingdom. After that they rode on together, and chanced upon a land where war and famine reigned, and the king already thought he must perish, for the scarcity was so great. Then the prince went to him and gave him the loaf, wherewith he fed and satisfied the whole of his kingdom, and then the prince gave him the sword also, wherewith he slew the host of his enemies, and could now live in rest and peace. The prince then took back his loaf and his sword, and the 3 brothers rode on. But after this they entered 2 more countries where war and famine reigned, and each time the prince gave his loaf and his sword to the kings, and had now delivered 3 kingdoms. And after that they went on board a ship and sailed over the sea. During the passage the 2 eldest conversed apart and said, "The youngest has found the water of life, and not we, for that our fathers will give him the kingdom that belongs to us, and he will rob us of all of our fortune." They then began to seek revenge, and plotted with each other to destroy him. They waited until they found him fast asleep. Then they poured the water of life out of the cup, and took it for themselves, but into the cup they poured salt sea water. Now therefore, when they arrived home, the youngest took his cup to the sick king in order that he might drink out of it and be cured. But scarcely had he drunk a very little of this salt sea water than he became still worse than before. And as he was lamenting over this, the 2 eldest brothers came and accused the youngest of having intended to poison him, and said that they had brought him the true water of life and handed it to him. He had scarcely tasted it when he felt the sickness departing, and became strong and healthy as in the days of his youth. After that they both went to the youngest, mocked him, and said, "You certainly found the water of life, but you have had the pain, and we the gain. You should have been cleverer, and should have kept your eyes open. We took it from you whilst you were asleep at sea, and when a year is over, one of us will go and fetch the beautiful princess. Beware that you do not disclose aught of this to our father. Indeed, he does not trust you, and if you say a single word, you shall lose your life into the bargain. But if you kept silent, you shall have it as a gift." The old king was angry with his youngest son, and thought he had plotted against his life. So he summoned the court together, and had sentence pronounced upon his son, that he should be secretly shot. And once when the prince was riding forth to the chase, suspecting no evil, the king's huntsman was told to go with him. And when they were quite alone in the forest, the huntsman looked so sorrowful that the prince said to him, "Dear huntsman, what ails you?" The huntsman said, "I cannot tell you, and yet I ought." Then the prince said, "Say openly what it is. I will pardon you." "Alas," said the huntsman, "I am to shoot you dead. The king has ordered me to do it." Then the prince was shocked and said, "Dear huntsman, let me live. There, I give you my royal garments. Give me your common ones in their stead." The huntsman said, "I will willingly do that. Indeed, I would not have been able to shoot you." Then they exchanged clothes, and the huntsman returned home, while the prince went further into the forest. After a time 3 wagons of gold and precious stones came to the king for his youngest son, which were sent by the 3 kings who had slain their enemies with the prince's sword, and maintained their people with his bread, and who had wished to show their gratitude for all of that. The old king then thought, "Can my son have been innocent?" And he said to his people, "Would that he was still alive! How it grieves me that I have suffered him to be killed." "He still lives," said the huntsman. "I could not find it in my heart to carry out your command." And he told the king how it had happened. Then a stone fell from the king's heart, and he had it proclaimed in every country that his son might return and be taken into favor again. The princess, however, had a road made up to her palace which was quite bright and golden, and told her people that whosoever came riding straight along it to her would be the right one and was to be admitted, and whoever rode by the side of it was not the right one and was not to be admitted. As the time was now close at hand, the eldest thought he would hasten to go to the king's daughter, and give himself out as her rescuer, and thus win her for his bride, and the kingdom to boot. Therefore he rode forth, and when he arrived in front of the palace, and saw the splendid golden road, he thought, "It would be a sin and a shame if I were to ride over that." And he turned aside, and rode on the right side of it. But when he came to the door, the servants told him that he was not the right one, and that he was to go away again. Soon after this, the second prince set out, and when he came to the golden road, and his horse had put one foot on it, he thought, "It would be a sin and a shame. A piece might be trodden off." And he turned aside and rode on the left side of it. And when he reached the door, the attendants told him he was not the right one, and he was to go away again. When at last the year had entirely expired, the third son likewise wished to ride out of the forest to his beloved, and with her forget his sorrows. So he set out and thought of her so incessantly, and wished to be with her so much, that he never noticed the golden road at all. So his horse rode onwards up the middle of it, and when he came to the door, it was opened, and the princess received him with joy, and said he was her savior, and lord of the kingdom, and the wedding was celebrated with great rejoicing. When it was over, she told him that his father invited him to come to him, and had forgiven him. So he rode thither, and told him everything, how his brothers had betrayed him, and how he had nevertheless kept silent. The old king wished to punish them, but they had already put to sea, and never came back, as long as they lived. The Spirit in the Bottle. There was once a poor woodcutter who toiled from early morning till late at night. When at last he had laid by some money, he said to his boy, "You are my only child. I will spend the money which I have earned with the sweat of my brow on your education. If you learn some honest trade, you can support me in my old age, when my limbs have grown stiff and I am obliged to stay at home." Then the boy went to a high school and learned diligently, so that his masters praised him, and he remained there a long time. When he had worked through 2 classes, but was still not yet perfect in everything, the little pittance which the father had earned was all spent, and the boy was obliged to return home to him.
"Ah," said the father sorrowfully, "I can give you no more, and in these hard times I cannot earn a farthing more than will suffice for our daily bread."
"Dear father," answered the son, "don't trouble yourself about it. If it is God's will, it will turn to my advantage. I shall soon accustom myself to it." When the father wanted to go into the forest to earn money by helping to chop and stack wood, the son said, "I will go with you and help you."
"Nay, my son," said the father, "that would be hard for you. You are not accustomed to rough work, and will not be able to bear it. Besides, I have only one axe and no money left wherewith to buy another."
"Just go to the neighbor," answered the son. "He will lend you his axe until I have earned one for myself." The father then borrowed an axe of the neighbor, and next morning at break of day they went out into the forest together. The son helped his father and was quite merry and brisk about it, but when the sun was right over their heads, the father said, "We will rest and have our dinner, and then we shall work twice as well." The son took his bread in his hands and said, "Just you rest, father. I'm not tired. I will walk up and down a little in the forest and look for birds' nests."
"Oh, you fool," said the father. "Why should you want to run about there? Afterwards you will be tired and no longer able to raise your arm. Stay here and sit down beside me."
The son, however, went into the forest, ate his bread, was very merry, and peered in among the green branches to see if he could discover a bird's nest anywhere. So he walked to and fro until at last he came to a great dangerous-looking oak, which certainly was already many hundreds years old, and which 5 men could have not spanned. He stood still and looked at it, and thought, "Many a bird must have built its nest in that." And then all at once it seemed to him that he heard a voice. He listened and became aware that someone was crying in a very smothered voice,
"Let me out! Let me out!"
He looked around but could not discover anything. Then he fancied that the voice came out of the ground, so he cried, "Where are you?" The voice answered,
"I'm down here amongst the roots of the oak tree. Let me out! Let me out!"
The schoolboy began to loosen the earth under the tree and search among the roots, until at last he found a glass bottle in a little hollow. He lifted it up and held it against the light, and then he saw a creature shaped like a frog springing up and down in it.
"Let me out! Let me out!"
it cried anew, and the boy, thinking no evil, drew the cork out of the bottle. Immediately a spirit ascended from it and began to grow, and grew so fast that in a very few moments he stood before the boy, a terrible fellow as big as half of the tree.
"Do you know," he cried in an awful voice, "what your reward is for having let me out?"
"No," replied the boy fearlessly. "How should I know that?"
"Then I will tell you," cried the spirit. "I must strangle you for it."
"You should have told me that sooner," said the boy, "for I should have left you shut up, but my head shall stand fast for all you can do. More persons than one must be consulted about it."
"More persons here, more persons there," said the spirit. "You shall have the reward you have earned. Do you think that I was shut up there for such a long time as a favor? No, it was a punishment for me. I am the mighty Mercurius. Whoso releases me, him I must strangle."
"Slowly," answered the boy. "Not so fast. I must first know that you really were shut up in that little bottle, and that you are a right spirit. If indeed you can get in it again, I will believe, and then you may do as you will with me."
The spirit said haughtily, "That is a very trifling feat."
He drew himself together, and he made himself as small and slender as he had been at first, so that he crept through the same opening, and right through the neck of the bottle in again. Scarcely was he within than the boy thrust the cork he had drawn back into the bottle, and threw it among the roots of the oak in its old place, and the spirit was deceived. And now the schoolboy was about to return to his father, but the spirit cried very piteously,
"Ah, do let me out! Ah, do let me out!"
"No," answered the boy, "not a second time. He who has once tried to take my life shall not be set free by me, now that I have caught him again."
"If you will set me free," said the spirit, "I will give you so much that you will have plenty all the days of your life."
"No," answered the boy, "you would cheat me as you did the first time."
"You're spurning your own good luck," said the spirit. "I will do you no harm, but will reward you richly."
"I will venture it. Perhaps he will keep his word, and anyhow, he shall not get the better of me." Then he took out the cork, and the spirit rose up from the bottle as he had done before, stretched himself out, and became as big as a giant.
"And now you shall have your reward," said he,
and handed the boy a little rag just like sticking plaster, and said,
"If you spread one end of this over a wound, it will heal, and if you rub steel or iron with the other end, it will be changed into silver."
"Well, I must try that," said the boy, and went to a tree, tore off the bark with his axe, and rubbed it with one end of the plaster. It immediately closed together and was healed. "Now it is all right," he said to the spirit, "and we can part." The spirit thanked him for his release, and the boy thanked the spirit for his present, and went back to his father.
"Where have you been racing about?" said the father. "Why have you forgotten your work? I always said that you would never come to anything."
"Be easy, father. I will make it up."
"Make it up indeed," said the father angrily. "That's no use."
"Take care, father. I will. I will soon hew that tree there, so that it will split." And he took his plaster, rubbed the axe with it, and dealt a mighty blow, but as the iron had changed into silver, the edge bent. "Hi, father, just look what a bad axe you've given me. It has become quite crooked."
The father was shocked and said, "Ah, what have you done? Now I shall have to pay for that, and I have not the wherewithal, and that is all the good I have got by your work."
"Don't get angry," said the son. "I will soon pay for the axe."
"Oh, you blockhead," cried the father, "wherewith will you pay for it? You have nothing but what I give you. These are students' tricks that are sticking in your head, and you have no idea of woodcutting."
After a while the boy said, "Father, I can really work no more. We had better take up a holiday."
What?" answered he. "Do you think I will sit with my hands lying in my lap like you? I must go on working, but you may take yourself off home."
"Father,
I am here in this wood for the first time, and I don't know my way alone. Do go with me."
As his anger had now abated, the father at last let himself be persuaded and went home with him. Then he said to the son, "Go and sell your damaged axe, and see what you can get for it, and I must earn the difference in order to pay the neighbor." The son took the axe and carried it into town to a goldsmith who tested it, laid it on the scales, and said, "It is worth 400 talers. I have not so much money as that by me."
The son said, "Well, give me what thou have. I will lend you the rest."
The goldsmith gave him 300 talers and remained 100 in his debt. The son thereupon went home and said,
"Father, I have got the money. Go and ask the neighbor what he wants for the axe."
"Well, I know that already," answered the old man. 1 taler and 6 groschen.
"Then give him 2 talers, 12 groschen. That is double and enough. See, I have money in plenty."
And he gave the father 100 talers and said,
"You shall never know want. Live as comfortably as you like."
"Good heavens," said the father, "how have you come by these riches?" The boy then told how all had come to pass, and how he, trusting in his luck, had made such a packet. But with the money that was left, he went back to the high school and went on learning more, and as he could heal all wounds with his plaster, he became the most famous doctor in the whole world. Bearskin. There was once a young fellow who enlisted as a soldier, conducted himself bravely, and was always the foremost when it rained bullets. So long as the war lasted, all went well, but when peace was made, he received his dismissal, and the captain said he might go where he liked. His parents were dead, and he had no longer a home, so he went to his brothers and begged him to take him in and keep him until the war broke out again. The brothers, however, were hard-hearted and said, "What can we do with you? You are of no use to us. Go and make a living for yourself." The soldier had nothing left but his gun, so he took that on his shoulder and went forth into the world. He came to a wide heath on which nothing was to be seen but a circle of trees. Under these he sat sorrowfully down and began to think over his fate. "I have no money," thought he. "I have learnt no trade but that of fighting, and now that they have made peace, they don't want me any longer, so I see beforehand that I shall have to starve." All at once he heard a rustling, and when he looked around, a strange man stood before him, who wore a green coat and looked right stately, but had a hideous cloven foot. "I know already what you are in need of," said the man. "Gold and possessions shall you have, as much as you can make away with. Do what you will. But first, I must know if you are fearless, that I may not bestow my money in vain." "A soldier and fear? How can those two things go together?" he answered. "You can put me to the proof." "Very well then," answered the man. "Look behind you." The soldier turned around and saw a large bear which came growling towards him. "Oh!" cried the soldier, "I will tickle your nose for you, so that you shall soon lose your fancy for growling." And he aimed at the bear and shot it through the muzzle. It fell down and never stirred again. "I see quite well," said the stranger, "that you are not wanting in courage, but there is still another condition which you will have to fulfill." "If it does not endanger my salvation," replied the soldier, who knew very well who was standing by him. "If it does, I'll have nothing to do with it." "You will look at that for yourself," answered Greencoat. "You shall for the next 7 years neither wash yourself, nor comb your beard nor your hair, nor cut your nails, nor once say the Lord's Prayer. I will give you a coat and a cloak, which during this time you must wear. If you die during these 7 years, you are mine. If you remain alive, you are free and rich to boot for all the rest of your life." The soldier thought of the great extremity in which he now found himself, and as he so often had gone to meet death, he resolved to risk it now also, and agreed to the terms. The devil took off his green coat and gave it to the soldier, and said, "If you have this coat on your back and put your hand into the pocket, you will always find it full of money." Then he pulled the skin off the bear and said, "This shall be your cloak, and your bed also, for thereon you shall sleep, and in no other bed shall you lie, and because of this apparel should you be called Bearskin." Whereupon the devil vanished. The soldier put the coat on, felt it once in the pocket, and found that the thing was really true. Then he put on the bearskin and went forth into the world and enjoyed himself, refraining from nothing that did him good and his money harm. During the first year his appearance was passable, but during the second he began to look like a monster. His hair covered nearly the whole of his face, his beard was like a piece of coarse felt, his fingers had claws, and his face was so covered with dirt that if cress had been sown on it, it would have come up. Whoever saw him ran away, but as he everywhere gave the poor money to pray that he might not die during the 7 years, and as he paid well for everything, he still always found shelter. In the 4th year he entered an inn where the landlord would not receive him, and would not even let him have a place in the stable, because he was afraid the horses would be scared. But as Bearskin thrust his hand into his pocket and pulled out a handful of ducats, the host let himself be persuaded, and gave him a room in an outhouse. Bearskin, however, was obliged to promise not to let himself be seen, lest the inn should get a bad name. As Bearskin was sitting alone in the evening, and wishing from the bottom of his heart that the 7 years were over, he heard a loud lamenting in a neighboring room. He had a compassionate heart, so he opened the door, and he saw an old man weeping bitterly and wringing his hands. Bearskin went nearer, but the man sprang to his feet and tried to escape from him. At last, when the man perceived that Bearskin's voice was human, he let himself be prevailed upon, and by kind words Bearskin succeeded so far that the old man revealed the cause of his grief. His property had dwindled away by degrees. He and his daughters would have to starve, and he was so poor that he could not pay the innkeeper, and was to be put in prison. "If that is your only trouble," said Bearskin, "I have plenty of money." He caused the innkeeper to be brought thither, paid him, and even put a purse full of gold into the poor man's pocket. When the old man saw himself set free from all of his troubles, he did not know how to show his gratitude. "Come with me," said he to Bearskin. "My daughters are all miracles of beauty. Choose one of them for yourself as a wife. When she hears what you have done for me, she will not refuse you. You do in truth look a little strange, but she will soon put you to rights again." This pleased Bearskin well, and he went along. When the eldest saw him, she was so terribly alarmed at his face that she screamed and ran away. The second stood still and looked at him from head to foot, but then she said, "How can I accept a husband who no longer has a human form? The shaven bear that once was here and passed itself off for a man pleased me far better, for at any rate it wore a hussar's dress and a white gloves. If he were only ugly, I might get used to that." The youngest, however, said, "Dear father, that must be a good man to have helped you out of your trouble. So if you have promised him a bride for doing it, your promise must be kept." It was a pity that Bearskin's face was covered with dirt and with hair, for if not, they might have seen how delighted he was when he heard those words. He took a ring from his finger, broke it in two, and gave her one half. The other he kept for himself. Then he wrote his name on her half, and hers on his, and begged her to keep her peace carefully. Then he took his leave and said, "I must still wander about for 3 years, and if I do not return then, you are free, for I shall be dead. But pray to God to preserve my life." The poor betrothed bride dressed herself entirely in black, and when she thought of her future bridegroom, tears came into her eyes. Nothing but contempt and mockery fell to her lot from her sisters. "Take care," said the eldest. "If you give him your hand, he will strike his claws into it." "Beware," said the second. "Bears like sweet things, and if he takes a fancy to you, he will eat you up." "You must always do as he likes," began the elder again, "or else he will growl." And the second continued, "But the wedding will be a merry one, for bears dance well." The bride was silent, and did not let them vex her. Bearskin, however, traveled about the world from one place to another, did good where he was able, and gave generously to the poor that they might pray for him. At length, at the last day of 7 years' dawn, he went once more out onto the heath, and seated himself beneath a circle of trees. It was not long before the wind whistled, and the devil stood before him and looked angrily at him, and then threw Bearskin his coat and asked for his own green one back. "We have not gotten so far as that yet," answered Bearskin. You must first make me clean." Whether the devil liked it or not, he was forced to fetch water and wash Bearskin, comb his hair, and cut his nails. After this, he looked like a brave soldier and was much handsomer than he had ever been before. When the devil had gone away, Bearskin was quite light-hearted. He went into the town, put on a magnificent velvet coat, seated himself in a carriage drawn by 4 white horses, and drove to his bride's house. No one recognized him. The father took him for a distinguished general and led him into the room where his daughters were sitting. He was forced to place himself between the 2 eldest, who helped him to wine, gave him the best pieces of meat, and thought that in all the world they had never seen a handsomer man. The bride, however, sat opposite to him in her black dress, and never raised her eyes nor spoke a word. When at length he asked the father if he would give him one of his daughters to wife, the 2 eldest jumped up, ran into their bedrooms to put on splendid dresses, for each of them fancied she was the chosen one. The stranger, as soon as he was alone with his bride, brought out his half of the ring and threw it in a glass of wine which he handed across the table to her. She took the wine, but when she had drunk it and had found half the ring lying at the bottom, her heart began to beat. She got the other half, which she wore on a ribbon around her neck, joined them together, and saw that the 2 pieces fitted exactly together. Then said he, "I am your betrothed bridegroom, who you saw as Bearskin, but through God's grace I have again received my human form, and have once more become clean." He went up to her, embraced her, and gave her a kiss. In the meantime the 2 sisters came back in full dress, and when they saw that the handsome man had fallen to the share of the youngest, and heard that he was Bearskin, they ran out full of anger and rage. One of them drowned herself in the well, and the other one hanged herself on a tree. In the evening someone knocked at the door, and when the bridegroom opened it, it was the devil in his green coat, who said,
You see, I have now got 2 souls in the place of your 1.
The Willow-wren and the Bear. Once in the summertime, the bear and the wolf were walking in the forest, and the bear heard a bird singing so beautifully that he said,
"Brother Wolf, what bird is that sings so well?"
That is the king of birds, said the wolf, before whom we must bow down.
In reality, the bird was the willow-wren.
"If that's the case," said the bear, "I should very much like to see his royal palace. Come, take me thither."
That is not done quite as you seem to think, said the wolf. You must wait until the queen comes.
Soon afterwards the queen arrived with some food in her beak, and the Lord King came too, and they began to feed their young ones. The bear would have liked to go at once, but the wolf held him back by the sleeve and said,
No, you must wait until the Lord and Lady Queen have gone away again.
So they took stock of the hole where the nest lay, and they trotted away. The bear, however, could not rest until he had seen the royal palace, and when a short time had passed, he went to it again. The king and queen had just flown out, so he peeped in and saw 5 or 6 young ones lying in there.
"Is that a royal palace?"
cried the bear.
"It is a wretched palace, and you are not king's children. You are disreputable children."
When the young wrens heard that, they were frightfully angry and screamed,
No, that we are not. Our parents are honest people. Bear, you will have to pay for that.
The bear and the wolf grew uneasy, and turned back and went into their holes. The young willow-wrens, however, continued to cry and scream, and when their parents again brought food, they said,
We will not so much as touch one fly's leg. No, not if we were dying of hunger, until you have settled whether we are respectable children or not. The bear has been here and has insulted us.
Then the old king said,
"Be easy. He shall be punished."
and he at once flew with the queen to the bear's cave and called in,
"Old Growler, why have you insulted my children? You shall suffer for it. We will punish you by a bloody war."
Thus war was announced to the bear, and all 4-footed animals were summoned to take part in it. oxen, asses, cows, deer, and every other animal that the earth contained. And the willow-wren summoned everything which flew in the air, not only birds large and small, but midges and hornets, bees and flies had to come. When the time came for the war to begin, the willow-wren sent out spies to discover who was the enemy's commander-in-chief. The gnat, who was most crafty, flew into the forest where the enemy was assembled, and hid herself beneath the leaf of a tree where the password was to be announced. There stood the bear, and he called the fox before him and said,
Fox, you are the most cunning of all animals. You shall be general and lead us.
Good, said the fox. But what signal shall we agree upon?
No one knew that, so the fox said,
I have a fine long bushy tail, which almost looks like a plume of red feathers. When I lift my tail up quite high, all is going well, and you must charge. But if I let it hang down, run away as fast as you can.
When the gnat heard that, she flew away again, and revealed everything, down to the minutest detail, to the willow-wren. When day broke and the battle was to begin, all the four-footed animals came running up with such a noise that the earth trembled. The willow-wren with his army also came flying through the air with such a humming and whirring and swarming that everyone was uneasy and afraid, and on both sides they advanced against each other. But the willow-wren sent down the hornet with orders to settle beneath the fox's tail and to sting it with all of its might. When the fox felt the first sting, he started so that he lifted one leg from pain, but he bore it and still kept his tail high in the air. At the second sting, he was forced to put it down for a moment. At the third, he could hold out no longer, screamed, and put his tail between his legs. When the animals saw that, they thought all was lost and began to flee, each into his hole, and the birds had won the battle. Then the king and queen flew home to their children and cried,
Children, rejoice, eat and drink to your heart's content. We have won the battle.
But the young wren said,
We will not eat yet. The bear must come to the nest and beg for pardon and say that we are honorable children before we will do that.
Then the willow-wren flew to the bear's hole and cried,
Growler, you are to come to the nest of my children and beg their pardon, or else every rib of your body shall be broken.
So the bear crept thither in the greatest fear and begged their pardon. And now at last the young wrens were satisfied, and sat down together and ate and drank, and made merry until quite late into the night. The Devil's Sooty Brother. A discharged soldier had nothing to live on and did not know how to make his way. So he went out into the forest, and when he had walked for a short time, he met a little man who turned out to be the devil. The little man said to him,
What ails you? You seem so very sorrowful.
Then the soldier said,
I am hungry, but I have no money.
The devil said,
If you will hire yourself to me and be my serving man, you shall have enough for all of your life. You shall serve me for 7 years, and after that you shall again be free. But one thing I must tell you, and that is, you must not wash, comb, or trim yourself, or cut your hair or nails, or wipe the water from your eyes.
The soldier said,
All right, if there is no help for it.
And he went off with the little man, who straightway led him down into hell. Then he told him what he had to do. He was to poke the fire under the kettles wherein the hell broth was stewing, keep the house clean, drive all the sweepings behind the doors, and see that everything was in order. But if he once peeped into the kettles, it would go ill with him. The soldier said,
Good, I will take care.
And then the old devil went out again on his wanderings, and the soldier entered upon his new duties, made the fire, and swept the dirt well behind the doors, just as he had been bidden. When the old devil came back, he looked to see if all had been done, appeared satisfied, and went forth the second time. The soldier now took a good look on every side. The kettles were standing all around hell with a mighty fire below them, and inside they were boiling and sputtering. He would have given anything to look inside of them, if the devil had not so particularly forbid him. At last he could no longer restrain himself. He slightly raised the lid on the first kettle and peeped in, and there he saw his former corporal sitting. "Aha, old bird," said he. "Do I meet you here? You once had me in your power, and now I have you." And he quickly let the lid fall, poked the fire, and added a fresh log. After that, he went to the second kettle, raised its lid also a little, and peeped in, and there sat his former ensign. "Aha, old bird, so I find you here. You once had me in your power, and now I have you." He closed the lid again and fetched yet another log to make it really hot. Then he wanted to see who might be sitting in the third kettle, and who should it be but his general. "Aha, old bird, do I meet you here? Once you had me in your power, now I have you." And he fetched the bellows and made the hellfire blaze right under him. So he did his work 7 years in hell, did not wash, comb, or trim himself, or cut his hair or nails, or wash the water out of his eyes, and the 7 years seemed so short to him that he thought he had only been half a year. Now when the time had fully gone by, the devil came and said,
"Well, Hans, what have you done?"
"I poked the fire under the kettles, and I've swept all the dirt well behind the doors."
"But you have peeped into the kettles as well. It is lucky for you that you added fresh logs to them, or else your life would have been forfeited. Now that your time is up, will you go home again?"
"Yes," said the soldier. "I should very much like to see what my father is doing at home." The devil said,
"In order that you may receive the wages you have earned, go and fill your knapsack full of sweepings and take it home with you. You must also go unwashed and uncombed, with long hair on your head and beard, and with uncut nails and dim eyes. And when you are asked whence you come, you must say, 'From hell.' And when you are asked who you are to say, 'The devil's Sooty brother, and my king as well.'"
The soldier held his peace, and did as the devil had bade him, but he was not at all satisfied with his wages. Then, as soon as he was up in the forest again, he took his knapsack from his back to empty it, but on opening it, the sweepings had become pure gold. "I should never have expected that," said he, and was well pleased and entered the town. The landlord was standing in front of the inn, and when he saw the soldier approaching, he was terrified because Hans looked like such a horrible sight, worse than a scarecrow. He called to him and asked, "Whence do you come?" "From hell." "Well, who are you?" "The devil's Sooty brother, and my king as well." Then the host would not let him enter, but when Hans showed him the gold, he came and unlatched the door himself. Hans then ordered the best room in attendance, ate and drank his fill, but neither washed nor combed himself as the devil had bidden him, and at last he lay down to sleep. But the knapsack full of gold remained before the eyes of the landlord, and left him no peace, and during the night he crept in and stole it away. Next morning, however, when Hans got up and wanted to pay the landlord and travel further, behold, his knapsack was gone. But he soon composed himself and thought, "You have been unfortunate, from no fault of your own." And straightway he went back again to hell, complained of his misfortune to the old devil, and begged for his help. The devil said,
"Seat yourself. I will wash, comb, and trim you, cut your hair and nails, and wash your eyes for you."
And when he had done with him, he gave him the knapsack back again full of sweepings, and said,
"Go and tell the landlord that he must return your money, or else I will come and fetch him, and he shall poke the fires in your place."
Hans went up and said to the landlord, "You have stolen my money. If you do not return it, you shall go down to hell in my place, and will look as horrible as I." Then the landlord gave him the money, and more besides, only begging him to keep the secret, and Hans was now a rich man. He set out on his way home to his father, bought himself a shabby smock to wear, and strolled about making music, for he had learned to do that while he was with the devil in hell. There was, however, an old king in that country, before whom he had to play, and the king was so delighted with his playing that he promised him his eldest daughter in marriage. But when she heard that she was to be married to a common fellow in a smock, she said,
"Rather than do that, I would go into the deepest water."
Then, instead, the king gave him the youngest, who was quite willing to do it to please her father, and thus the devil's sooty brother got the king's daughter, and when the aged king died, he received the whole kingdom likewise. Sweet Porridge. There was a poor but good little girl who lived alone with her mother, and they no longer had anything to eat. So the child went into the forest, and there an aged woman met her who was aware of her sorrow, and presented her with a little pot, which when she said, "Cook, little pot, cook," would cook good, sweet porridge. And when she said, "Stop, little pot, stop," it ceased to cook. The girl took the pot home to her mother, and now they were freed from their poverty and hunger, and ate sweet porridge as often as they chose. Once on a time when the girl had gone out, her mother said,
"Cook, little pot, cook."
and it did cook, and she ate till she was satisfied, and then she wanted the pot to stop cooking, but did not know the word. So it went on cooking, and the porridge rose over the edge, and still it cooked on until the kitchen and whole house were full, and then the next house, and then the whole street, just as if it wanted to satisfy the hunger of the whole world, and there was the greatest distress, but no one knew how to stop it. At last, when only one single house remained, the child came home and just said,
"Stop, little pot, stop."
and it stopped and gave up cooking, and whosoever wished to return to the town had to eat his way back. Wise Folks. One day a peasant took his good hazel stick out of the corner and said to his wife Trina, "I am going across country, and shall not return for 3 days. If during that time the cattle dealer should happen to call and want to buy our 3 cows, you may strike a bargain at once, but unless you can get 200 tailors for them, nothing else. Do you hear?"
"For heaven's sake, just go in peace," answered the woman. "I will manage that."
"You indeed," said the man. "You once fell on your head when you were a little child, and that affects you even now. But let me tell you this, if you do anything foolish, I will make your back black and blue, and not with paint, I assure you, but with the stick which I have in my hand, and the coloring shall last a whole year. You may rely on that." And having said that, the man went on his way. Next morning the cattle dealer came, and the woman had no need to say many words to him. When he had seen the cows and heard the price, he said, "I'm quite willing to give that. Honestly speaking, they're worth it. I'll take the beasts away with me at once." He unfastened their chains and drove them out of the byre, but just as he was going out of the yard door, the woman clutched him by the sleeve and said,
"You must give me the 200 tailors now, or I cannot let the cows go."
"True," answered the man, "but I have forgotten to buckle on my money belt. Have no fear, however. You shall have security for my paying. I will take 2 cows with me and leave 1, and then you will have a good pledge." The woman saw the force of this, and let the man go away with the cows, and thought to herself, "How pleased Hans will be when he finds how cleverly I have managed it." The peasant came home on the 3rd day, as he said he would, and at once inquired if the cows were sold.
"Yes, indeed, dear Hans," answered the woman, "and as you said, for 200 tailors. They are scarcely worth so much, but the man took them without making any objection."
"Where is the money?" asked the peasant.
"Oh, I have not got the money," replied the woman. "He happened to forget his money belt, but he will soon bring it, and he left good security behind him."
"What kind of security?" answered the man.
"One of the 3 cows, which he shall not have until he has paid me for the other 2. I have managed very cunningly, for I have kept the smallest, which eats the least."
The man was enraged and lifted up his stick, and was just going to give her the beating he had promised her, when suddenly he let the stick fail and said, "You are the stupidest goose that had ever waddled on God's earth, but I'm sorry for you. I will go out under the highways and wait for 3 days to see if I find anyone who is still stupider than you.
If I succeed in doing so, you shall go scot-free, but if I do not find him, you shall receive your well-deserved reward without any discount."
He went out into the great highways, sat down on a stone, and waited for what would happen. Then he saw a peasant's wagon coming towards him, and a woman was standing upright in the middle of it, instead of sitting on the bundle of straw which was lying beside her, or walking near the oxen and leading them. The man thought to himself, "That is certainly one of the kind I am in search of," and jumped up and ran backwards and forwards in front of the wagon like one who is not in his right mind.
"What do you want, my friend?" said the woman to him. "I don't know you. Where do you come from?"
"Well, I have fallen down from heaven," replied the man, "and I don't know how to get back again. Couldn't you drive me up?"
"No," said the woman. "I don't know the way. But if you come from heaven, you can surely tell me how my husband is, who has been there these 3 years. You must have seen him."
"Oh, yes, I've seen him, but all men can't get on well. He keeps sheep, and the sheep give him a great deal to do. They run up the mountains and they lose their way in the wilderness, and he has to run after them and drive them together again. His clothes are all torn to pieces, too, and will soon fall off of his body. There's no tailor there, for St. Peter won't let any of them in, as you know by the story."
"Who would have thought it?"
cried the woman.
"I'll tell you what. I'll fetch his Sunday coat, which is still hanging at home in the cupboard. He can wear that and look respectable. You will be so kind as to take it with you, right?"
"Well, that won't do very well," answered the peasant. "People are not allowed to take clothes into heaven. They are taken away at the gate."
"Then listen," said the woman. "I sold my fine wheat yesterday and got a good lot of money for it. I will send that to him. If you hide the purse in your pocket, no one will know that you have it."
"If you can't manage it any other way," said the peasant, "I will do you that favor."
"Just sit still where you are," said she, "and I will drive home and fetch the purse. I shall soon be back again. I do not sit on the bundle of straw, but stand up in the wagon, because it makes it lighter for the cattle."
She drove her oxen away, and the peasant thought, "That woman has a perfect talent for folly. If she really brings the money, my wife may think herself fortunate, for she will get no beating." It was not long before she came in a great hurry with the money, and with her own hands put it in his pocket. Before she went away, she thanked him again 1,000 times for his courtesy. When the woman got home again, she found her son, who had come in from the field. She told him what unexpected things had befallen her, and then added,
"I am truly delighted at having found an opportunity of sending something to my poor husband. Who would have ever imagined that he could be suffering for want of anything up in heaven?"
The son was full of astonishment.
"Mother," said he, "it is not every day that a man comes from heaven in this way. I will go out immediately and see if he is still to be found. He must tell me what it's like up there and how the work is done."
He saddled his horse and rode off with all speed. He found the peasant, who was sitting under a willow tree and was about to count the money in his purse.
"Have you seen a man who has fallen down from heaven?" cried the youth to him.
"Yes," answered the peasant. "He had set out on his way back up there, and has gone up that hill, from whence it will be rather nearer. You could still catch him up, if you were to ride fast."
"Alas," said the youth, "I have been doing tiring work all day, and the ride here has completely worn me out. You know the man. Be so kind as to get on my horse, and go and persuade him to come here."
"Aha," thought the peasant, "here is another who has not a brain in his head. Why should I not do you this favor?" said he, and mounted the horse and rode off at a quick trot. The youth remained sitting there until night fell, but the peasant never came back.
"The man from heaven must certainly have been in a great hurry and would not turn back," thought he, "and the peasant has no doubt given him the horse to take to my father."
He went home and he told his mother what had happened, and that he had sent his father the horse so that he might not have to always be running about.
"You have done well," answered she. "Your legs are younger than his, and you can go on foot."
When the peasant got home, he put the horse in the stable beside the cow, which he had as a pledge, and then he went to his wife and said, "Trina,
As your luck would have it, I have found two who are still sillier fools than you. This time you escape without a beating. I will store it up for another occasion." Then he lighted his pipe, sat down in his grandfather's chair, and said, "It was a good stroke of business to get a sleek horse and a great purse full of money into the bargain for 2 lean cows. If stupidity always brought in as much as that, I would be quite willing to hold it in honor." So thought the peasant, but you, no doubt, prefer simpletons. Stories about snakes. The snakes in these stories are referred to as paddocks. There was once a little child whose mother gave her every afternoon a small bowl of milk and bread, and the child seated herself in the yard with it. But when she began to eat, a paddock came creeping out of a crevice in the wall, dipped its little head in the dish, and ate with her. The child took pleasure in this, and when she was sitting there with her little dish, and the paddock did not come at once, she cried,
"Paddock, paddock, come swiftly, hither come, thou tiny thing. Thou shalt have thy crumbs of bread. Thou shalt refresh thyself with milk."
Then the paddock came in haste, and enjoyed its food. It even showed gratitude, for it brought the child all kinds of pretty things from its hidden treasures, bright stones, pearls, and golden playthings. The paddock, however, drank only the milk and left the breadcrumbs alone. Then one day the child took its little spoon and struck the paddock gently on its head and said,
"Eat the breadcrumbs as well, little thing."
The mother, who was standing in the kitchen, heard the child talking to someone, and when she saw that she was striking a paddock with her spoon, she ran out with a log of wood and killed the good little creature. From that time forth, a change came over the child. As long as the paddock had eaten with her, she had grown tall and strong, but now she lost her pretty rosy cheeks and wasted away. It was not long before the funeral bird began to cry in the night, and the redbreast to collect little branches and leaves for a funeral wreath, and soon afterwards the child lay on her bier. Story 2. An orphan child was sitting by the town wall spinning when she saw a paddock coming out of a hole low down in the wall. Swiftly she spread out beside it one of the blue silk handkerchiefs for which paddocks have such a strong liking, and which are the only things they will creep on. As soon as the paddock saw it, it went back, and then returned, bringing with it a small golden crown, laid it on the handkerchief, and then went away again. The girl took up the crown, which glittered and was of delicate golden filigree work. It was not long before the paddock came back for the second time, but when it did not see the crown any more, it crept up to the wall, and in its grief smote its little head against it as long as it had the strength to do so, until at last it lay there dead. If the girl had but left the crown where it was, the paddock would certainly have brought still more of its treasures out of the hole. Story 3. The paddock cries. The child says,
"Come out."
The paddock comes out, whereupon the child inquires about her little sister.
"Have you not seen little red stockings?"
The paddock says,
"No, I have not. Have you?"
The Poor Miller's Boy and the Cat. In a certain mill lived an old miller who had neither wife nor child, and 3 apprentices served under him. As they had been with him several years, he one day said to them, "I am old, and want to sit behind the stove. Go out, and whichsoever of you brings me the best horse home, to him will I give the mill, and in return for it he shall take care of me until my death." The third of the boys, however, was the dunce, who was looked on as foolish by the others. They begrudged the mill to him, and afterwards he would not even have it. Then all 3 went out together, and when they came to the village, the 2 said to stupid Hans, "You may just as well stay here. As long as you live, you will never get a horse." Hans, however, went with them, and when it was night they came to a cave in which they lay down to sleep. The two smart ones waited until Hans had fallen asleep. Then they got up and went away, leaving him where he was. And they thought that they had done a very clever thing, but it was certain to turn out ill for them. When the sun rose and Hans woke up, he was lying in a deep cavern. He looked around on every side and exclaimed, "Oh heavens, where am I?" And then he got up and clambered out of the cave, went into the forest and thought, "Here I am, quite alone and deserted. How shall I obtain a horse now?" Whilst he was thus walking full of thought, he met a small tabby cat which said quite kindly,
"Hans, where are you going?"
"Alas, you cannot help me."
"I well know your desire," said the cat. "You wish to have a beautiful horse. Come with me and be my faithful servant for 7 years long, and then I will give you one more beautiful than any you have ever seen in your whole life."
"Well, this is a strange cat," thought Hans, "but I'm determined to see if she's telling the truth." So she took him with her into her enchanted castle, where there was nothing but kittens who were her servants. They leapt nimbly upstairs and downstairs, and were merry and happy. In the evening, when they sat down to dinner, 3 of them had to make music. One played the bass viola, the other the fiddle, and the third put the trumpet to his lips, and blew out his cheeks as much as he possibly could. When they had dined, the table was carried away, and the cat said,
"Now, Hans, come and dance with me."
"No," said he, "I won't dance with a pussy cat. I've never done that yet."
"Then take him to bed,"
said she to the cats. So one of them lighted him to his bedroom, one pulled his shoes off, one his stockings, and at last one of them blew out the candle. Next morning they returned and helped him out of bed. One put his stockings on for him, one tied his garters, one brought his shoes, one washed him, and one dried his face with her tail. "That feels very soft," said Hans. He, however, had to serve the cat and chop some wood every day, and to do that he had an axe of silver, and a wedge and sawer of silver, and the mallet of copper. So he chopped the wood small, stayed there in the house, and had good meat and drink, but never saw anyone but the tabby cat and her servants. Once she said to him,
"Go and mow my meadow, and dry the grass,"
and she gave him a scythe of silver and a whetstone of gold, but bade him deliver them up again carefully. So Hans went thither, and did what he was bidden, and when he had finished the work, he carried the scythe, the whetstone, and the hay to the house, and he asked if it was not time yet for her to give him his reward.
"No," said the cat. "You must first do something more for me of the same kind. There is timber of silver, carpenter's axe, square, and everything that is needful, all of silver. With these build me a small house."
And Hans built the small house, and said that he had now done everything, and still he had no horse. Nevertheless, the 7 years had gone by with him as if they were 6 months. The cat asked him if he would like to see her horses. "Yes," Hans said. Then she opened the door of the small house, and when she had opened it, there stood 12 horses, such horses so bright and shining that his heart rejoiced at the sight of them. And now she gave him to eat and drink, and said,
"Go home. I will not give you your horse now, but in 3 days' time I will follow you and bring it."
So Hans set out, and she showed him the way to the mill. She, however, had never once given him a new coat, and he had been obliged to keep on his dirty old smock, which he had brought with him, and which during the 7 years had everywhere become too small for him. When he reached home, the 2 other apprentices were there again as well, and each of them certainly had brought a horse with him, but one of them was a blind one, and the other lame. They asked Hans where his horse was. "It will follow me in 3 days' time." Then they laughed and said, "Indeed, stupid Hans, where will you get a horse? It will be a fine one, we're sure." Hans went into the parlor, but the miller said he should not sit down to table, for he was so ragged and torn that they would all be ashamed of him if anyone came in. So they gave him a mouthful of food outside, and at night, when they went to rest, the 2 others would not let him have a bed, and at last he was forced to creep into the goose house and lie down on a little hard straw.
In the morning when he awoke, the 3 days had passed, and a coach came with 6 horses, and they shone so bright that it was delightful to see them. And a servant brought a 7th as well, which was for the poor miller's boy. A magnificent princess alighted from the coach, and went into the mill, and this princess was the little tabby cat, whom poor Hans had served for 7 years. She asked the miller where the miller's boy in dunce was. Then the miller said, "We cannot have him here in the mill, for he is so ragged he's lying in the goose house." Then the king's daughter said that they were to bring him immediately. They brought him out, and he had to hold his little smock together just to cover himself. The servants unpacked splendid garments and washed him and dressed him, and when that was done, no king could have looked more handsome. Then the maiden desired to see the horses which the other apprentices had brought home with them, and one of them was blind, and the other lame. So she ordered the servant to bring the 7th horse, and when the miller saw it, he said that such a horse as they had never yet entered his yard.
"And that is for the 3rd miller's boy," said she.
"Then he must have the mill," said the miller. But the king's daughter said that the horse was there, and that he was to keep his mill as well, and took her faithful Hans and set him in the coach, and drove away with him. They first drove to the little house which he had built with the silver tools, and behold, it was a great castle now, and everything inside of it was silver and gold. And then she married him, and he was rich, so rich that he had enough for all the rest of his life. After this tale, let no one ever say that anyone who is silly can never become a person of importance. The Two Travelers. Hill and vale do not meet, but the children of men do, good and bad. In this way a shoemaker and tailor once met on their travels. The tailor was a handsome little fellow who was always merry and full of enjoyment. He saw the shoemaker coming towards him from the other side, and as he observed by his bag what kind of trade he plied, he sang a little mocking song to him.
"Sew me the seam, draw me the thread, spread it over with pitch, knock the nail on the head."
The shoemaker, however, could not bear a joke. He pulled a face as if he had drunk vinegar, and made a gesture as if he were about to seize the tailor by the throat. But the little fellow began to laugh, reached in his bottle, and said,
"No harm was meant. Take a drink and swallow your anger down."
The shoemaker took a very hearty drink, and the storm on his face began to clear away. He gave the bottle back to the tailor and said, "I took a hearty gulp. They say it comes from much drinking, but not from great thirst. Shall we travel together?"
"Well, all right," answered the tailor, "if only it suits you to go into a big town where there is no lack of work."
"That is just where I want to go," answered the shoemaker. "In a small hamlet there is nothing to earn, and in the country people like to go barefoot." They traveled therefore onward together, and always set one foot before the other, like a weasel in the snow. Both of them had time enough, but little to bite and to break. When they reached the town they went about and paid their respects to the tradesmen, and because the tailor looked so lively and merry, and had such fine red cheeks, everyone gave him work willingly, and when luck was good the master's daughter gave him a kiss beneath the porch as well. When he again fell in with the shoemaker, the tailor had always the most in his bundle. The ill-tempered shoemaker made a wry face and thought, "The greater the rascal, the more the luck." But the tailor began to laugh and to sing, and shared all he got with his comrade. If a couple of pence jingled in his pockets, he ordered good cheer, and thumped the table in his joy till the glasses danced, and it was lightly come, lightly go with him. When they had traveled for some time, they came to a great forest through which passed the road to the capital. 2 footpaths, however, led through it, one of which was a 7 days' journey, and the other only 2, but neither of the travelers knew which way was the short one. They seated themselves beneath an oak tree, and took counsel together, how they should forecast, and for how many days they should provide themselves with bread. The shoemaker said, "One must look before one leaps. I will take with me bread for a week."
"What?" said the tailor. "Drag bread for 7 days on one's back like a beast of burden, and not be able to look about? I shall trust in God, and not trouble myself about anything. The money I have in my pocket is as good in summer as it is in winter, but in hot weather bread gets dry and moldy into the bargain. Even my coat does not last as far as it might. Besides, why should we not find the right way? Bread for 2 days, that's enough."
Each, therefore, bought his own bread, and then they tried their luck in the forest. It was as quiet in there as a church. No wind stirred, no brook murmured, and no bird sang, and through the thickly leaved branches no sunbeam forced its way. The shoemaker spoke never a word. The bread weighed so heavily on his back that the sweat streamed down his cross and gloomy face. The tailor, however, was quite merry. He jumped about, whistled on a leaf, or sang a song, and thought to himself, "God in heaven must be pleased to see me so happy." This lasted 2 days, but on the third the forest would not come to an end, and the tailor had eaten up all of his bread. So after all, his heart sank down a yard deeper. Nevertheless, he did not lose courage, but relied on God and his luck. On the evening of the third day, he lay down hungry under a tree, and rose again the next morning, hungry still. So also passed the fourth day, and when the shoemaker seated himself on a fallen tree and devoured his dinner, the tailor was only a spectator. If he begged for a little piece of bread, the other laughed mockingly and said, "You have always been so merry. Now you can see for once what it is to be sad. The birds which sing too early in the morning are struck by the hawk in the evening." In short, he was pitiless. But on the fifth morning, the poor tailor could no longer stand up, and was hardly able to utter one word for weakness. His cheeks had gone white, and his eyes were red. Then the shoemaker said to him, "I will give you a bit of bread today, but in return for it, I will put out your right eye." The unhappy tailor, who still wished to save his life, had to submit. He wept once more with both eyes, and then held them out, and the shoemaker, who had a heart of stone, put out his right eye with a sharp knife. The tailor called to remembrance what his mother had formerly said to him when he had been eating secretly in the pantry. "Eat what one can, and suffer what one must." When he had consumed his dearly bought bread, he got on his legs again, forgot his misery, and comforted himself with the thought that he could always see enough with one eye. But on the sixth day, hunger made itself felt again, and gnawed him almost to the heart. In the evening he fell down by a tree, and on the seventh morning he could not raise himself up for faintness, and death was close at hand. Then said the shoemaker, "I will show mercy and give you bread once more, but you shall not have it for nothing. I shall put out your other eye for it." And now the tailor felt how thoughtless his life had been, prayed to God for forgiveness, and said, "Do what you will. I will bear what I must. But remember that our Lord God does not always look on passively, and that an hour will come when the evil deed which you have done to me, and which I have not deserved of you, will be requited. When times were good with me, I shared what I had with you. My trade is of that kind that each stitch must also be exactly like the other. If I no longer have my eyes, and can sew no more, I must go a-begging. And at any rate, do not leave me here alone when I am blind, or I shall die of hunger." The shoemaker, however, who had driven God out of his heart, took the knife and put out his left eye. Then he gave him a bit of bread to eat, held out a stick to him, and drew him on behind him. When the sun went down, they got out of the forest, and before them in the open country stood the gallows. Thither the shoemaker guided the blind tailor, and left him alone and went his way. Weariness, pain, and hunger made the wretched man fall asleep, and he slept the whole night. When day dawned he awoke, but he knew not where he lay. 2 poor sinners were hanging on the gallows, and the crow sat on the head of each of them. Then one of the men who had been hanged began to speak, and said, "Brother, are you awake?"
"Yes, I am awake,"
answered the second. "Then I will tell you something," said the first. "The dew which this night has fallen down over us from the gallows gives everyone who washes himself with it his eyes again. If blind people did but know this, how many would regain their sight who do not believe that to be possible?" When the tailor heard that, he took his pocket-handkerchief, pressed it on the grass, and when it was moist with dew, he washed the sockets of his eyes with it. Immediately it was fulfilled what the man on the gallows had said, and a couple of healthy new eyes filled the sockets. It was not long before the tailor saw the sun rise behind the mountains. In the plain before him lay the great royal city with its magnificent gates and 100 towers, and the golden balls and crosses which were on the spires began to shine. He could distinguish every leaf on the trees, saw the birds which flew past, and the midges which danced in the air. He took a needle out of his pocket, and as he could thread it as well as he had ever done, his heart danced with delight. He threw himself on his knees, thanked God for the mercy he had shown him, and said his morning prayer. Nor did he forget to pray for the poor sinners who were hanging there, swinging against each other in the wind like the pendulums of a clock. Then he took his bundle on his back and soon forgot the pain of heart he had endured, and he went on his way singing and whistling. The first thing he met was a brown foal running about the fields at large. He caught it by the mane and wanted to spring on it and ride it into town. The foal, however, begged to be set free. "I am still too young," it said. "Even a light tailor such as you would break my back in two. Let me go until I have grown strong. A time may perhaps come when I may reward you for it."
"Run off," said the tailor. "I see you're still a giddy thing."
He gave it a touch with the switch over its back, whereupon it kicked up its hind legs for joy, leapt over hedges and ditches, and galloped away into the open country. But the little tailor had eaten nothing since the day before.
"The sun, to be sure, fills my eyes," said he, "but the bread does not fill my mouth. The first thing that comes my way and is even half edible will have to suffer for it."
In the meantime, a stork stepped solemnly over the meadow towards him.
"Halt, halt!"
cried the tailor, and seized him by the leg.
"I don't know if you're good to eat or not, but my hunger leaves me no great choice. I must cut your head off and roast you."
"Don't do that," replied the stork. "I am a sacred bird which brings mankind great profit, and no one does me any injury. Leave me my life, and I may do you good in some other way."
"Well, be off, cousin Longlegs," said the tailor.
The stork rose up, let its long legs hang down, and flew gently away.
"What's to be the end of this?" said the tailor to himself at last. "My hunger grows greater and greater, and my stomach more and more empty. Whatsoever comes in my way now is lost."
At this point, he saw a couple of young ducks which were on a pond come swimming towards him.
"You've come up at just the right moment," said he,
and he laid hold of one of them and was about to wring its neck. On this, an old duck which was hidden among the reeds began to scream loudly and swam to him with an open beak and begged him urgently to spare her dear children.
"Can you not imagine," said she, "how your mother would mourn if anyone wanted to carry you off and give you your finishing stroke?"
"Oh, just be quiet," said the good-tempered tailor. "You shall keep your children."
And he put the prisoner back into the water. When he turned around, he was standing in front of an old tree which was partly hollow, and he saw some wild bees flying in and out of it.
"There, I shall at once find the reward of my good deed," said the tailor. "The honey will refresh me."
But the queen bee came out and threatened him and said,
"If you touch my people and destroy my nest, our sting shall pierce your skin like 10,000 red-hot needles. But if you leave us in peace and go your way, we will do you a service for it at another time."
The little tailor saw that here also nothing was to be done. 3 dishes empty, and nothing on the 4th is a bad dinner. He dragged himself, therefore, with his starved-out stomach into the town, and as it was just striking 12, all was ready cooked for him in the inn, and he was able to sit down at once to dinner. When he was satisfied, he said,
"Now I will get to work."
He went around the town, sought a master, and soon found a good situation. And as he had thoroughly learned his trade, it was not long before he became famous, and every man wanted to have his new coat made by the little tailor, whose importance increased daily.
"I can go no further in skill," said he, "and yet things improve every day."
At last, the king appointed him as the court tailor. But what odd things do happen in the world. On the very same day, his former comrade, the shoemaker, also became court shoemaker. When the latter caught sight of the tailor, and saw that he had once more 2 healthy eyes, his conscience troubled him. "Before he takes revenge on me," he thought to himself, "I must dig a pit for him. He, however, who digs a pit for another, falls into it himself." In the evening, when work was over, and it had grown dusk, he stole to the king and said, "Lord King, the tailor is an arrogant fellow, and has boasted that he will get the golden crown back again, which was lost in ancient times."
"Well, that would please me very much," said the king,
and he caused the tailor to be brought before him the next morning, and ordered him to get the crown back again, or to leave the town forever.
"Oh-ho," thought the tailor, "a rogue gives more than he has got.
If the surly king wants me to do what can be done by no one, I will not wait till morning, but will go out of the town at once, today."
He packed up his bundle, therefore, but when he was without the gate, he could not help being sorry to give up his good fortune, and turned his back on the town in which all had gone so well with him. He came to the pond where he had made the acquaintance of the ducks, and at that very moment the old one whose young ones he had spared was sitting there by the shore, pluming herself with her beak. She knew him again instantly, and asked why he was hanging his head so.
"You will not be surprised when you hear what has befallen me," replied the tailor, and he told her his fate. "If that be all," said the duck, "we can help you. The crown fell into the water, and it lies down below at the bottom. We will soon bring it up again for you. In the meantime, just spread your handkerchief out on the bank."
She dived down with her 12 young ones, and in 5 minutes she was up again and sat with the crown resting on her wings, and the 12 young ones were swimming around about, and had put their beaks under it, and were helping to carry it. They swam to the shore and put the crown on the handkerchief. No one can imagine how magnificent this crown was. When the sun shone on it, it gleamed like 100,000 carbuncles. The tailor tied his handkerchief together by the 4 corners and carried it to the king, who was full of joy, and put a gold chain around the tailor's neck. When the shoemaker saw that one blow had failed, he contrived a second, and he went to the king and said,
"Lord King, the tailor has become insolent again. He boasts that he will copy and wax the whole of the royal palace, with everything that pertains to it, loose or fast, inside and out."
The king sent for the tailor and ordered him to copy and wax the whole of the royal palace, with everything that pertained to it, movable or immovable, within and without. And if he did not succeed in doing this, or if so much as one nail on the wall were wanting, he should be imprisoned for his whole life underground. The tailor thought, "It gets worse and worse. No one can endure that," and he threw his bundle on his back and went forth. When he came to the hollow tree, he sat down and hung his head. The bees came flying out, and the queen bee asked him if he had a stiff neck, since he hung his head so.
"Alas, no," answered the tailor. "Something quite different weighs me down."
And he told her what the king had demanded of him. The bees began to buzz and hung amongst themselves, and the queen bee said,
"Just go home again, but come back tomorrow at this time, and bring a large sheet with you, and then all will be well."
So we turned back again, but the bees flew to the royal palace and straight into it through the open windows, crept around about in every corner, and inspected everything most carefully. Then they hurried back and modeled the palace in wax with such rapidity that anyone looking on would have thought it was growing right before his eyes. By the evening all was ready, and when the tailor came the next morning, the whole of the splendid building was there, and not one nail in the wall or tile of the roof was wanting, and it was delicate withal, white as snow, and smelt sweet as honey. The tailor wrapped it carefully in his cloth, and took it to the king, who could not admire it enough, placed it in his largest hall, and in return for it, he presented the tailor with a large stone house. The shoemaker, however, did not give up, but went for the 3rd time to the king and said,
"Lord King, it has come to the tailor's ears that no water will spring up in the courtyard of the castle, and he has boasted that it shall rise up in the midst of the courtyard to a man's height, and be clear as crystal."
Then the king ordered the tailor to be brought before him and said,
"If a stream of water does not rise in my courtyard by tomorrow, as you have promised, the executioner shall in that very place make you shorter by a head."
The poor tailor did not take long to think about it, but hurried out to the gate, and because this time it was a matter of life and death to him, tears rolled down his face. While he was thus going forth full of sorrow, the foal to which he had formerly given its liberty, and which now had become a beautiful chestnut horse, came leaping towards him.
"The time has come," it said to the tailor, "when I can repay you for your good deed. I know already what is needful to you, but you shall soon have help. Get on me, my back can carry 2 such as you."
The tailor's courage came back to him. He jumped up in one bound, and the horse went full speed back into town, and right up to the courtyard of the castle. It galloped as quickly as lightning thrice around it, and at the 3rd time it fell violently down. At the same instant, however, there was a terrific clap of thunder. A fragment of the earth in the middle of the courtyard sprang like a cannonball into the air and over the castle, and directly after it, a jet of water rose as high as a man on horseback, and the water was as pure as crystal, and the sunbeams began to dance on it. When the king saw this, he arose in amazement, and went and embraced the tailor in the sight of all men. But good fortune did not last long. The king had daughters in plenty, one still prettier than the other, but he had no son. So the malicious shoemaker betook himself for the fourth time to the king and said,
Lord King, the tailor has not given up his arrogance. He has now boasted that if he liked, he could cause a son to be brought to the Lord King through the air.
The king commanded the tailor to be summoned and said,
If you cause a son to be brought to me within 9 days, you shall have my eldest daughter to wife.
The reward is indeed great, thought the little tailor. One would willingly do something for it, but the cherries grow too high for me. If I climb for them, the bough will break beneath me, and I shall fall. He went home, seated himself cross-legged on his work table, and thought over what was to be done. It can't be managed, cried he at last. I will go away after all. I can't live in peace here. He tied up his bundle and hurried away to the gate. When he got to the meadow, he perceived his old friend the stork, who was walking backwards and forwards like a philosopher. Sometimes he stood still, took a frog into close consideration, and at length swallowed it down. The stork came to him and greeted him.
I see, he began, that you have your pack on your back. Why are you leaving the town?
The tailor told him what the king had required of him, and how he could not perform it, and he lamented his misfortune.
Don't let that turn your hair gray, said the stork. I will help you out of your difficulty. For a long time now I have carried the children in the swaddling clothes into the town, so for once in a way I can fetch a little prince out of the well. Go home and be easy. In 9 days from this time, repair to the royal palace, and there I will come.
The little tailor went home, and at the appointed time was at the castle. It was not long before the stork came flying thither and tapped at the window. The tailor opened it, and Cousin Longlegs came carefully in, and walked with solemn steps over the smooth marble pavement. He had, moreover, a baby in his beak that was as lovely as an angel, and stretched out its little hands to the queen. The stork laid it in her lap, and she caressed it and kissed it, and was beside herself with delight. Before the stork flew away, he took his traveling bag off of his back and handed it over to the queen. In it there were little paper parcels with colored sweetmeats, and they were divided amongst the little princesses. The eldest, however, received none of them, but instead got the merry tailor for a husband. It seems to me, said he, just as if I had won the highest prize. My mother was right after all. She always said that whoever trusts in God and only has good luck can never fail. The shoemaker had to make the shoes in which the little tailor danced at the wedding, after which he was commanded to quit the town forever. The road to the forest led him to the gallows. Worn out with anger, rage, and the heat of the day, he threw himself down. When he closed his eyes and was about to sleep, the 2 crows flew down from the heads of the men who were hanging there, and they pecked his eyes out. In his madness he ran into the forest and must have died there of hunger, for no one has ever either seen him or heard of him again.